In this video, we're going to take a look at one of the most basic and fundamental structures in a Strapi project. This is our content types and our collections of content types, which enable us to structure and build out the data within the back end of our application. Let's head on over to our Strapi project to get a better look. If you don't already have your Strapi project running, then be sure to change into the directory of your var_x folder and then cd into that folder, and then go into the backend and npm run develop. That is going to go ahead and start up our Strapi server. Alright, now once that's running, we just need to go to http://localhost at port 1337/admin, and that will open up our Strapi administrator panel. And then here, go ahead and log in with the account that you created at the end of our Strapi project setup. Oh, and make sure that this is the email. All right, and here is our Strapi dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in a little bit. There we go. Now I can see that much better. And this is where we're going to want to come to every time we want to work with the back end of our application. This is where we're going to work with our users and authentication and permissions, as well as what we'll get into this video, building and structuring all of the data and content of our application. You can see here in their welcome message that it says we're logged in as the first administrator, and to discover all the powerful features of Strapi, they recommend we create our first collection type or content type. I think they've started using the term collection type and content type kind of interchangeably, but for the purpose of this course, we'll just specify that as the content type being the structure of our data and the collections being the actual lists of the content itself. Okay, but you'll see what we mean a little bit more as we jump into it. So let's go ahead and create our first content type. We're going to start off by just creating an example content type that we'll actually just delete later. That way you can get familiar with all of the concepts of what's going on here before we jump into some of the more architectural considerations that'll go into the content types for our application. So you see that we were presented with this screen here, and first off it asks for a display name for our content type. So let's go ahead and call this content type article. Okay, just like that. And make sure you want to name your content types singular, article, not articles, because it'll actually then automatically create the collection list for us, and there it will automatically also have the S for plural. So our content type of article will be a collection of articles, but we'll see that. But let's go ahead and continue. Okay, so now you can see the article has popped up in the background, and you can now see under our collection types, we have article. Here, you're now presented with a list of all the different content types available for your collection. So essentially, the way you want to think about this page is, what do I need for an article? What information do I need to be able to actually create an article? Well, if you look at all of the different options that we have here, you see that we have all the different pieces that we need to really structure any type of content. So just to go through them quickly, we have text for small or long text, like titles or descriptions, rich text, which gives you editing options, numbers, dates, booleans, relations, which we'll get more into, which refers to other collections, emails, passwords, enumerations, so lists, media, JSON, and a unique identifier. These are all the different bits and pieces that we have to structure our data. And this is more than enough to handle any type of content that you'll probably ever run across. For an article, the first thing I would think of is probably a title for our article. So let's go ahead and select a text field. we'll add a new text field to our article, and the name of this text field, so what this field is for, is the title. I actually think I'll lowercase all of our field names, and then here you can select a type of text. So short text, which it says is best for titles, names, and links, and that enables exact search on the field. So that's something to keep in mind. Or you have the option of long text for descriptions or biographies. You see here the exact search is disabled on long text. Let's go ahead and leave it at short text because this is just for our title. And now let's flip over to the advanced settings. Here you can see we have a couple of cool options. First is a default value. So if whenever a new article was created, a title was not provided, this would give it a default value to fall back on. Or you can set a regular expression pattern to validate your field against. So this would be a pattern that you could use to make sure that text is formatted correctly, or however your application expects it to be formatted. Below these two options, we have the different settings for our field. So private field means this field will not show up in any API responses, which can be really helpful for certain parts of our content that we may not want to expose to our users. But the title is definitely something that we do want to have show up in the API response. We can also mark this as a required field. So we won't be able to create a new entry if the title is empty. And so that seems like something we would want. So let's go ahead and make the title required. You also can set it to be unique. So that means that no other entry can be created if an entry with that content already exists. So we probably don't want two articles with the exact same title. So let's go ahead and make it a unique field. And then you can set a maximum length or a minimum length. So for example, if we want to make sure that we do not have more than 30 characters in our title, but no less than 5. Maybe make the max 50. This is just an example, but that just shows you what you can do and how you can use these settings to control the structure of your data. Let's go ahead and add another field, which will go ahead and save the title field and take us back to this screen. Now, the next thing I would think of for an article after the title of the article is probably the content of the article itself. Well, that again is going to be text, but this time it's going to be long text instead of short text. So we'll go ahead and name this text field content. So this will be the content of the article. And let's again make sure that this is a required field. It's a unique field, so we don't have two of the exact same articles. And let's set a minimum character count of 100. And then let's go ahead and add another field. You may think that we would need to select date to maybe have the date of when the article was written, but actually Strapi will automatically create a created at entry for us whenever we create a entry. And so if we need to know when the article was authored, we can just pull from that creation date. Maybe our article has a rating though. Maybe people are able to leave star ratings. And so this wouldn't actually be how we would implement it, but say we want to store that number of ratings. Well, we could go into number. We could call this our rating and we'll choose out of the type of number that it would be. In this case, a number would probably be between 1 and 5 or 1 and 10. So we'll select an integer. Let's go to advanced. And actually, we won't mark any of these as required or unique because we'll have multiple articles that could have the exact same rating. We don't want it to mark it as required because when you first post an article, there won't be any ratings. And we don't need to set a minimum or a maximum. Although we could set a minimum and a maximum to the scale of our rating system. So a minimum, say, of 1 and a maximum of 10. And then we can go ahead and add another field. And just to keep this simple, let's say the last thing that we need for our article is the author, the actual person who wrote the article. Well, assuming that that author is an author within our system, we would want to use a relation, okay? And relation is probably one of the coolest fields in my opinion, and one that you'll definitely be using a lot. I just really like how simple they made this and how easy that I think it is to think about. Here on the left, you have the content type that we've been creating, our article. Then you have the field name for what the relation that we're about to create is going to be called. Okay, that'll make a little more sense once we take a look at the right side, where we choose what we are relating our article to. Okay, well, remember I said we need a author. We need a user who created our article. So we would go ahead and click up on article here, and this is going to show us all of our other collection types. Now, since we just started, we only have the article collection type that we're working with, the permission, the role, and the user. So let's go ahead and select a user. And now just like that, you can see the UI changed in a way that I think makes this really easy to understand. First, you see that the field name here for article is now user. So this is the field name of this relation that we are adding. So we are adding a user to the article. And you can see here, you can pick different options for what relationship those two collections have. Okay, so you can see this first one represents a one-way singular relation. So in this option, an article has one user. Now that might sound at first like what we would actually be using ourselves, but this doesn't create a tie from the user back to the article. This just ties the article to a user. But we would probably also want our user to be able to pull a list of all of their own articles. So if we go to this next one, we can see that with this configuration, an article has a user and belongs to a user. So now the user will also have an article field with a relation to this article. However, this still isn't quite right either, because in this configuration, a user would only have one article, but a user will actually likely have multiple articles that they could create. So let's keep checking this out. If we select this one, you could see that an article belongs to many users. Okay, this would be if maybe an article has multiple authors. Okay, but that's still not quite exactly what we're looking for. If we go ahead and select the next one, you can see this says that in this configuration, a user has many articles. So here's our user, and here are all the articles. Well, that actually sounds like the relationship that we've been looking for. Our article will just have a field containing its one user, but our user will have a field containing all of his or her articles. That actually is going to be what we want, but let's just keep going to take a look at the other options. So this one is an article has and belongs to many users. So that would mean an article has multiple users and a user can have multiple articles. So this would actually be the example we would use if we wanted our articles to have multiple authors, because then an article would have multiple authors and each author could have multiple articles. Before, here on this one, an article belongs to many users, that would make it so that an article could have multiple authors, but each author could only have one article. Okay, so hopefully that clears that up. And then the last option here is similar to the very first option. The article has one user, so it ties an article to a user, but it doesn't tie a user back to the article. It's the same thing just for multiple users, but it still does not create a tie from those users back to the article. So there are many different use cases for each of these relations, and we'll get more into them for the different content types of our application. But for now, let's go ahead and select that a user has many articles, and let's check out the advanced settings. We can create this to be a unique field so that essentially only one of these relations per article could be possible. But I think we should be fine on this one without it. So let's go ahead and finish this up actually now. That would be the last field that I think we should add to our example article collection type. So let's go ahead and finish it up. And you can see here that it shows all the different fields that you selected for your article. Okay, and it's not saved yet, but we can go ahead, hit save over here, and that will commit our changes to the database and define our structure of our content, and then restart our Strapi application. In the next video, we'll get more into what is actually going on in that process. Now though, you can see here on the left, under collection types, we now have articles. So we can select articles, 0 entries are found, but we could now go and add a new article. So you see that? We just go right up to the top, click to add a new article, and here are the fields that we had selected. So a title, we could call it Udemy's Best New Courses. Content, get out of this Grammarly pop-up, and we could say number 1, and of course that would be the Jamstack, a complete guide to React e-commerce, the course you are taking right now. And let's give this article a rating. Oh, and look at that. The validation that we had set up saying that we needed at least, I think, 100 characters for our content is kicking in and telling us that it is too short. So let's go ahead and add number 2, and let's do my other course, implement high fidelity designs with Material UI and React JS. Let's see if that's long enough. There we go. So a rating, I think it was 1 to 10. Of course, let's give this article a 10 out of 10. And now over here on the right is where you select your relations. And so we have a user relation, so we need to select a user to add it to. Unfortunately though, we don't have any users created. But that's okay. We could go ahead and save. And in a real example, we would of course need a user to tie it to, but we can create this one without that relation. We can always go and we could create a user later and then tie it to the article. But again, I'm just showing this for example purposes, that once you create it, then your article is created in your database and you now have begun a collection of articles. Okay, so this is the content creation flow of Strapi. Once you define a content type and you have figured out what pieces of information you need for your application and for the content and experiences that you're creating, well, then it's just as easy as anybody coming here, opening it up and adding in the data for whatever fields or relationships that you have created and defined. This is where I think it's really going to enable some powerful behavior for letting you define your content types, but then enabling non-technical people to come in and actually enter the content in this screen right here, which is very easy to understand. So hopefully this gives you a lot to think about, and you really can start to see the power of Strapi and how simple it makes this whole process for us and the really interesting workflows that this might enable. So keep thinking about how you're going to create your content with Strapi, but in the next video, we're going to jump into how this is actually syncing with the database behind the scenes and what is going on there. So I'll see you over in that one.